My family dropped out of my life when my tech business failed. Every single one of them. 5 years later, my company went public. Net worth $38 million. And my mom showed up at my doorway with a list of her bills. Not a phone call first. Not a text. She drove 4 hours from Columbus to my house in Dublin, Ohio, rang the doorbell, and when I opened the door, she was standing there with an actual printed list. Bills she needed paid. A number written at the bottom. The specific expression of someone who had done the math and decided the math was a reasonable opening position. I looked at her, I looked at the list, I looked at her again. And then I said the thing that ended the conversation before it started. But before I tell you what I said, I need to tell you about the 5 years between the failure and the doorbell. Because what happened in those 5 years is not a story about revenge or about success as a weapon. It is a story about what you build when you have nothing left except the one thing nobody could take from you, which was what you understood about your own capacity. The failure was real. I need to say that clearly. The first company was not a near miss or a learning experience dressed up as a catastrophe. It was a genuine collapse. 31 employees who had to be let go. Investors who lost real money. A product that had reached the market 2 years ahead of the infrastructure needed to support it, and that had run out of runway before the market caught up. I had been 26 years old. I had convinced people to believe in the vision, and the vision had not survived contact with the timing. When the company went under in March of that year, I had $11,000 in personal savings, a lease on an apartment I could no longer afford, and the specific kind of exhaustion that did not come from working too hard, but from working as hard as you could and watching it not be enough. My family's response to this arrived over the following 8 weeks in the form of absences. Phone calls that went less frequent and then stopped. Invitations that stopped coming. The Sunday dinners that I had been included in my whole life that suddenly had scheduling conflicts every week. My Uncle David, who had told me at Thanksgiving 2 years earlier that I was the future of the family, stopped returning my texts. My cousin Marcus, with whom I had been close since childhood, sent me a single message 3 weeks after the collapse that said "tough break, man," and then did not speak to me again for 4 years. My mother, Carol, was the most complicated absence. She did not disappear completely. She called on birthdays. She sent a card at Christmas. But the warmth that had been the texture of our relationship for 28 years was replaced by something cooler and more careful, the specific quality of someone who was maintaining a connection without investing in it. She had told me once, during one of those birthday calls in the second year, that she just needed me to understand that she had her own financial stresses and that she could not be a safety net for someone who kept taking risks. I had said, "Mom, I'm not asking you to be a safety net. I called to say happy birthday." She had said, "I know, I just want us to be on the same page." We had not been on the same page for a long time. Subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and stay with me through all 5 of those years. Because what I built in the space my family left behind is the whole story. My name is Jordan Ellis, and I am 35 years old. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a neighborhood on the east side called Whitehall, where the houses were the kind of houses that had been well built in the 1950s and had been maintained with varying degrees of care in the decades since. My family's house had been maintained with care. My mother took pride in the upkeep of the physical environment in the way that some people expressed their organizational intelligence, through the visible order of a maintained home in a neighborhood where not every home was maintained equally. My mother, Carol Ellis, had worked for 22 years as an office manager for a dental practice in Columbus. She was organized, reliable, and had the specific competence of someone who had managed a complex small business operation for 2 decades, and who was good at it in a way that the practice's actual dentists recognized and depended on. She was also the primary social organizer of the Ellis family's extended network, the one who remembered birthdays, arranged the holiday gatherings, maintained the thread of connection among the various cousins and aunts and uncles who were otherwise too dispersed and too busy to hold themselves together without someone doing the holding. My father, Douglas, had left when I was 9. Not dramatically, He had simply accumulated a different life in Cincinnati with a woman he had met through work and had moved toward it slowly, and then all at once, the way people moved toward decisions they had been making for a long time before they made them formally. He sent child support until I was 18. He called on birthdays until I was about 22, and then the calls became sporadic and then they stopped. I did not carry this as a wound in the dramatic sense. I carried it as information about the relationship between presence and reliability that I applied to everything afterward. My mother had raised me with the specific self-sufficiency of a woman who had made peace with doing it alone and who had decided that the making peace was not going to be performed as martyrdom. She was not a complainer. She was a manager. She managed the house, managed the finances with the precision of someone for whom the margin between comfortable and not was real and required attention. And she managed me with the combination of warmth and expectation that produced the kind of child who understood both that they were loved and that the love had practical requirements. I was good at school in the specific way of someone who found systems interesting. Math and computers came easily because they had internal logic that could be followed from any starting point to any conclusion, and the following of that logic was satisfying in a way I could not fully explain, but recognized as important. My high school computer science teacher, a man named Mr. Jerome Parker, who had worked in software development before switching to teaching, and who was the kind of teacher who treated students as people with real capacity rather than as recipients of curriculum, had told me at the end of my junior year that I was the most naturally technical student he had taught in 9 years of teaching. He said I should seriously consider computer science at a university level, and that the field was going to be different in 10 years than it was when he had worked in it, and that the people who understood the underlying systems would be valuable regardless of how the surface changed. I took that seriously. I went to Ohio State on a partial merit scholarship and studied computer science and business in a dual program that I had specifically chosen, because I understood from watching my mother manage the dental practice that technical knowledge without business understanding was a partial tool. I graduated in 2012 with a dual degree and 3 years of internship experience at 2 software companies in Columbus and 1 in Pittsburgh, which had given me the specific practical understanding of how software products were built and sold, and supported that the classroom had approximated but not replicated. I had started the first company, Meridian Data Systems, in 2014 with 2 co-founders I had met during my time at one of the Columbus internships. The idea was real, a platform for small and medium businesses to manage their customer data in a way that gave them the analytical capability of larger enterprises at a price point that matched their scale. The market need was real. The technical solution we built was good. The business model worked on paper. What did not work was timing. The cloud infrastructure that our product needed to run efficiently at scale was available in 2016 and 2017 in a way it had not been in 2014 and 2015 when we were building. We built a product that was ahead of the infrastructure it required, and we ran out of the money to keep operating until the infrastructure caught up. This was not a mistake in the sense of a wrong decision. It was a miscalculation in the sense of an accurately described thing that arrived at the wrong moment. The collapse happened in stages that were each individually manageable until collectively they were not. First, the larger enterprise sales that were supposed to fund the small business growth did not close on the timeline we needed. Then the second round of funding came in smaller than projected. Then 2 of the 3 investors from the first round declined to participate in the third round. Then the third round fell short. Then we had 6 weeks of runway and 31 employees and a product that was working but not generating the revenue the business needed to survive. I let the employees go in the most organized and decent way I could manage under the circumstances. I wrote recommendations for everyone. I connected as many people as I could to positions at other companies through every contact I had. I paid out the vacation time and the remaining benefits from the personal savings I had available. I spent the last 3 weeks winding down the company with the specific focus of someone who had decided that how you ended something was as important as how you started it. Then I sat in my apartment with $11,000 in the bank and thought about what came next. What came next was not obvious and not immediate and not something that arrived with the clarity of a plan. It arrived as a series of decisions made one at a time in the specific direction of forward. The $11,000 lasted 4 months if I was careful, and I was careful. I moved out of the apartment I could no longer afford and into a room in a shared house in Clintonville, rented by a woman named Sarah Park, who was a graduate student in urban planning, and who had 2 other rooms available, and who charged reasonable rates, and who did not require a long lease. The room was small. It had a window facing the backyard and a closet and enough space for a desk and a bed and nothing else, which was exactly what I needed because what I needed was a desk. I worked at the desk for 14 hours a day for the first 3 months. Not on a new company, on understanding what had gone wrong with the old one with enough specificity that the understanding would be useful rather than just painful. I built a post-mortem document that was not for anyone else. It was for me, the honest internal accounting of where the decisions had been right and where they had been wrong, and what the difference between those 2 categories looked like in retrospect. The timing issue was real, but the timing issue was also partially a failure of my own analysis of the infrastructure dependency, which I had known was a risk and had not weighted correctly in the financial projections. The post-mortem took 6 weeks because I kept finding things I had not seen clearly in real time, and each thing required being looked at directly rather than processed quickly. Then I started thinking about what I actually understood that was valuable. What I understood was customer data and the specific problem that small and medium businesses had with it. The first company had failed to survive long enough to solve that problem at scale, but the understanding of the problem had survived the company's failure, and it was more refined for having operated inside it for 2 years. I understood the problem better in March of the failure year than I had understood it in January of the founding year, because 2 years of trying to solve it and running into all the ways the solution was harder than the initial vision had given me a much more detailed map of the actual territory. The second company was going to be different. Not a different problem, a different approach to the same problem. Specifically, a narrower initial scope, a stronger dependency on infrastructure that already existed rather than infrastructure that was developing, and a business model that produced revenue earlier in the product lifecycle rather than depending on growth metrics to carry the company until it reached the scale that revenue required. I spent 3 months building the concept, not the product, the concept. The specific articulation of what the second company would be, who it would serve, how it would make money, and what the path from initial product to sustainable operation looked like in detail rather than in outline. I showed the concept document to 2 people before I showed it to anyone else. The first was Sarah Park, not because she was a technologist, but because she was smart and direct, and would tell me if the document had fundamental logical problems without being invested in protecting my feelings about it. She read it over 2 evenings and came back with 7 specific questions. I answered 4 of them confidently, and the other 3 sent me back to the document to rebuild those sections. The second person was a man named Owen Hayes, who had been a mentor to me during my time at one of the Columbus software companies, and who had since retired from operating roles and was spending his time advising early-stage companies. Owen was 64 and had the quality of someone who had seen many versions of the story I was living and who had no interest in managing my emotional experience of it. He was interested in whether the thinking was sound. He read the concept document over a weekend and called me on Monday morning. He said, "The scope is right, the revenue model is right, the infrastructure dependency is addressed. 2 things need more work." He told me what the 2 things were. I fixed them. Then I started building. The second company was called Clarity Analytics. It was narrower than Meridian, focused specifically on customer data management for retail and e-commerce businesses, rather than the full SMB market we had tried to address in the first company. The narrower scope meant a smaller initial market, but a clearer product definition and a customer profile that I understood specifically rather than generally. I had one advantage in building the second company that I had not had in building the first one, which was that I had no money and no investors and no employees, which meant I had no choice but to build the product myself and make it work before I spent anyone else's capital on it. I built the initial product alone, 14 hours a day for 8 months. I had taken a part-time contract development role at a Columbus software company that paid enough to cover the Clintonville room and the groceries, and left enough time for the product work if I was disciplined about the schedule. The discipline was the same discipline the post-mortem had required, the specific focus of someone who had learned from a hard experience that attention to the right thing was more important than the application of more effort to the wrong thing. By month 8, I had a product that worked. By month 10, I had 3 paying customers. The 3 customers were small. Their monthly fees were modest. The numbers were not impressive in the context of what the first company had been trying to build. But the numbers were real, and they were coming from people who were paying for something that was working for them, which was a different and more important thing than the metrics that had been the measure of the first company's progress. I called Owen Hayes when the 3rd customer signed. He said, "How many do you need before you can raise a seed round?" I said, "I think 10 paying customers and 12 months of retention data." He said, "Then get to 10. I got to 10 in 7 months. During those 7 months, my family's absence was fully established. I was not thinking about it daily. The work consumed the daily attention. But it was the background condition of the period, the specific texture of the years that followed the failure. The Sunday dinners I was not at. The group text that I was still in, but that had stopped including me in the conversations that mattered. The birthday calls that came on the day and said nothing about what was happening in my life, because asking what was happening in my life had been the first thing that stopped. My cousin Marcus reached out once briefly in the 2nd year. He said he had heard from someone that I was working on something new and that was cool. I said yes, working on something new. He said keep it up. That was the full conversation. My mother called on my birthday in the 3rd year and said she hoped things were going better and that she had been thinking about me. I said I was doing okay. She said that was good. She asked if I was seeing anyone. I said no. She said there was plenty of time for that. The call lasted 11 minutes. I did not tell her about Clarity Analytics. I had thought about this decision explicitly. I had decided that I was not going to update my family on the progress of the second company while the progress was being made. This decision was not punishment. It was the practical management of my own attention. The experience of the first company's failure had shown me clearly how much of my energy had been consumed by the family's response to the failure. Not the family's fault. Simply the reality of what it took to manage the relationships during a difficult period on top of everything else the period required. The second company needed all of my attention. I was not going to introduce a variable that would consume some of it. I raised the seed round in the 4th year. Owen introduced me to 2 investors he knew and trusted, and I pitched both of them with the product data and the customer retention metrics, and the 12 months of operational evidence that the business model worked at the scale it was operating. Both invested. The round was modest by the standards of what tech companies sometimes raised, but it was enough to hire 3 people and expand the customer base and begin the work of building a sales operation rather than a one-person founder sales effort. The 3 hires were people I had known and worked with before, 2 from the first company's development team who had stayed in touch over the years and who had believed in the product vision then and understood the revised approach now, and 1 from the Columbus software company where I had done the part-time contract work. A woman named Patricia Wade, who had been in their customer success operation and who had a specific understanding of the kind of customer relationship management that the product I was building was designed to support. The customer base grew from 10 to 30 in the first year after the seed round, from 30 to 90 in the 2nd year, from 90 to 240 in the 3rd year. By the beginning of the 5th year, Clarity Analytics had 240 paying customers, an annual recurring revenue that had crossed the threshold that made a growth equity round possible, and an operating history that showed the specific combination of customer retention and revenue expansion that growth investors understood as the signal of a product that had found its market. The IPO was not my initial plan. The growth equity round had been the plan, but the conversations with potential growth equity investors produced, twice, the suggestion that the company's metrics and market positioning supported a public offering rather than another private round. And Owen had said when I told him about the conversations, if two independent investors said the same thing, that's not coincidence. Talk to a banker. I talked to a banker. The IPO happened in the 5th year. The first day of trading was a Thursday in October. I was in a conference room in New York, not on the trading floor. Clarity Analytics was not a company that did the theatrical opening bell ceremony because we had not built anything for theater. I watched the opening price on a laptop screen with Owen and Patricia and the two lead investors and the bankers who had underwritten the offering. The opening price was 42% above the offering price. The market capitalization on the first day of trading put my personal stake at $38 million. Owen said, "Congratulations." I said, "Thank you." Patricia said, "What do you do now?" I said, "Go back to work Monday." I flew back to Columbus that evening. I went home to my house in Dublin, which I had bought 8 months earlier when the IPO trajectory had become clear enough that the purchase was rational. I ordered food. I ate dinner alone. I watched the first episode of a show I had been meaning to watch for 6 months, and then I went asleep. My mother's doorbell ring happened on a Saturday 3 weeks later. 3 weeks is approximately how long it takes for information to travel from a tech company's IPO coverage in financial news to the extended family network of a person who is not a public figure, and whose name appears in the coverage as a founder and CEO rather than as a household name. My mother had found out, I learned later, through my Uncle David's wife, who had read something about the IPO in a business newsletter she subscribed to and had sent the link to the family group text that I had been functionally absent from for 4 years. The group text had apparently become briefly active with messages I did not see immediately because I had muted the group text approximately 18 months into the silence and checked it rarely. By the time I unmuted it to see what the activity was about, the activity had been going for 2 days and included messages from people I had not heard from in years. My Uncle David, Jordan's company went public. Did anyone know about this? My cousin Marcus, I knew he was working on something. Didn't know it was this. My Aunt Sharon, $38 million. That's real money. My Uncle David, we should reach out. Has anyone talked to him? My cousin Sandra, whom I had spoken to perhaps 4 times in the past 5 years. I'll text him. Sandra had texted me. Her text said, "Jordan, saw the news, so proud of you, we should catch up." The double exclamation points were doing a great deal of structural work in that sentence. I had not responded to Sandra's text, not from anger, from the honest assessment that there was nothing useful to say to that text that I could say briefly, and the non-brief version of what I would have said was not a conversation I wanted to have by text. My mother had not texted. My mother had driven 4 hours from Columbus to Dublin on a Saturday morning. I heard the doorbell at 10:15. I was at my kitchen table with coffee and a report I was reviewing. I was not expecting anyone. I opened the door. My mother was standing on the porch in a coat I recognized from several years earlier, holding a manila folder. She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, "Jordan." I said, "Mom." She said, "Can I come in?" I stepped back from the door. She came in. She looked around the entryway and the living room visible from it with the expression of someone taking in a space that communicated something they had not fully anticipated. The house was not large. It was well furnished, simply in the specific way of someone who had made their choices deliberately and without performance. It was a significant step from the Clintonville room. She sat at the kitchen table, in the chair across from where my coffee was. She placed the manila folder on the table. I sat down. I said, "How was the drive?" She said, 4 hours, Columbus was fine. I said, can I get you something? Coffee? She said, I'm okay. She looked at the folder, then she looked at me. She said, I saw the news about the company. I said, yes. She said, I'm proud of you. I said, thank you. She said, I know we haven't been as close as we used to be. I know these years have been hard. I said, yes. She said, I want you to know that I was always rooting for you. Even when I wasn't, when we weren't in touch as much, I was always rooting for you. I said, okay. She pushed the manila folder toward me. She said, I've been having some financial difficulties. The dental practice let some staff go and my hours were reduced and some things have built up. I made a list. I looked at the folder. I said, a list. She said, of the things that need attention. I thought, given the situation, maybe we could talk about. I said, Mom. She said, it's not that much altogether. I totaled it up. The numbers on the bottom of the last page. I said, Mom. She stopped. I said, do you remember the birthday call? In the 3rd year, when you said you hoped things were going better? She said, Jordan. I said, I had 40 paying customers when you made that call. I had a product that was working and people who were paying for it every month, and I was building something real. And you asked if I was seeing anyone. She said, I didn't know. I said, you didn't ask. You called for 11 minutes and you asked if I was seeing anyone because asking about the work meant engaging with a version of me you had decided was a risk you could not afford. She said, that's not fair. I said, it's accurate. She was quiet. I said, the Sunday dinners, the group text. Uncle David, who told me I was the future of the family and then didn't respond to my texts for 3 years. Marcus, who texted tough break and then didn't speak to me again until Sandra sent him the IPO link. She said, people get busy. People have their own lives. I said, Mom, you drove 4 hours with a printed list of bills. She looked at the folder. I said, the people who stayed with me during the 5 years between the failure and the IPO, the people who called and asked how the work was going and who said they believed it was possible when it did not look possible. Those are the people I think about when I think about what this is for. She said, I'm your mother. I said, yes. She said, that doesn't disappear because of a hard few years. I said, no, it doesn't. You're still my mother. That's not what's being decided here. She said, then what is being decided? I said, whether a printed list of bills is the right thing to bring to the first real conversation we've had in 5 years. She looked at the folder on the table. Then she picked it up. She said, I didn't handle this well. I know that. I said, no. She said, I was scared. When the company fell apart, I was scared for you and I didn't know how to be inside that fear and be helpful at the same time. So I stepped back. And then stepping back became a habit and the habit went on longer than I understood while I was in it. I said, I believe that. She said, that's not an excuse. I said, no, it's an explanation. Those are different things. She was quiet for a moment. She said, Jordan, I am genuinely proud of you, not because of the number, because you came back from something that would have broken most people and you built something real. I know that cost you things. I said, yes. She said, is there a version of this where we start over, from where we actually are? I thought about that. I said, where we actually are is that you drove 4 hours and brought a list of bills. And the conversation we need to have is not about the bills. The bills can wait. The conversation we need to have is about the 5 years. She said, that's going to be a hard conversation. I said, yes. She said, are you willing to have it? I looked at my mother, the woman who had managed the dental practice for 22 years and raised me alone after my father left, and who had made her peace with doing it alone, and who had handled her fear of my failure by stepping back, and had not found her way forward again until a financial newsletter gave her a reason. She was not a villain. She was a person who had made a decision that was also a mistake and who was sitting at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning, having driven 4 hours to do something that she had convinced herself was about the bills, but that was actually about something older and harder. I said, "Put the folder away." She put the folder in her bag. I said, "I'll make more coffee." She said, "Okay." I made more coffee. We talked for 3 hours. The 3-hour conversation was not a resolution. I want to be precise about that because stories that involve a hard thing and then a conversation tend to imply that the conversation closes the hard thing. And what this conversation did was open it rather than close it. What it opened was the specific territory of 5 years of distance that had not been examined by either of us while it was happening, and that required examination before it could become something different. My mother said things I had not expected her to say. She said that the failure of the first company had frightened her in a way she had not managed well, and that the specific fear had been not that I would fail financially, but that I would be broken by it in a way that she would not know how to help. She said she had understood that her help during the first company's best years had been limited, and that her limitation had bothered her, and that when the failure happened, the combination of her own limitations and the scale of what I was managing had produced a withdrawal rather than an advance. She said she knew this was the wrong response. She said she had known it was the wrong response while she was making it, and had done it anyway because the alternative required her to be in a space she was not equipped for. I had said, "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in about 6 years." She had said, "I know." I had said, "I needed you to be in a space you were not equipped for. That was what the period required." She had said, "I know that now." The conversation covered the Sunday dinners and the group text and the birthday calls. It covered my Uncle David and my cousin Marcus in the context of what the extended family's response had communicated about how the family understood value and presence. My mother did not defend those responses. She said the family had followed her lead in ways she had not intended or recognized until I named them clearly. I said, "When you stepped back, the rest of them had permission to step back." She said, "Yes, I think that's right." I said, "You're the center of the social structure. When you withdrew, the structure withdrew." She said, "I hadn't thought of it that way." I said, "It's accurate." She said, "What do you need from me now in terms of what changes?" I thought about that. I said, "I need the relationship to be real, not managed. Real means you ask about the work and you actually want to know the answer. Real means when something is hard you call and stay on the phone past 11 minutes. Real means the group text includes me in the actual conversations and not just the logistics." She said, "That's fair." I said, "Real also means the bills conversation is a separate conversation. Not today. When we have rebuilt enough that the conversation can happen between two people who have a real relationship, rather than between a mother who needs something and a son whose phone number just became worth calling again." She said, "That was direct." I said, "Yes." She said, "You're right." She stayed for lunch. I made something simple, sandwiches, which was the honest meal rather than the performative one. We ate at the kitchen table, and the conversation moved into easier territory. What she had been doing with her time, what she had been watching, a neighborhood change in Columbus that she found annoying, and that she described with the specific animated irritation that I had always found endearing. She was funny when she was relaxed. She had always been funny. I had forgotten that in the managed distance years, because the managed distance produced managed versions of everything. When she left, she stood at the door and she said, "Jordan, thank you for letting me in." I said, "You drove 4 hours." She said, "I mean metaphorically." I said, "I know." She said, "Call me this week." I said, "Yes." She drove away. I went back to the kitchen table and I sat with the remaining coffee and I thought about what had just happened. My mother had driven 4 hours with a list of bills and left with a conversation instead. The bills were still a reality she needed to address. I had not closed that door permanently. I had postponed the conversation until the relationship was real enough for the conversation to happen properly. When that time came, the decision would be made based on the actual state of the relationship, rather than on the specific panic of a doorbell on a Saturday morning. I called Owen Hayes that afternoon. He answered and said, "How are things?" I said, "My mother drove 4 hours with a printed list of her bills." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "What did you do?" I said, "Told her to put the folder away and made coffee." He said, "That sounds right." I said, "She stayed for 3 hours. It was a real conversation." He said, "Also right." I said, "Owen, how do you rebuild something that you did not break but that was broken anyway?" He said, "The same way you build anything, one decision at a time, in the direction you want it to go, without expecting it to be finished quickly." I said, "That sounds like every piece of advice you've ever given me." He said, "It's the same advice because it's the same answer." I said, "Okay." He said, "How's the work?" I said, "There's a lot of it." He said, "Good, that's what you want." I said, "Yes." He said, "Call me Thursday." I said I would. Uncle David reached out 6 weeks after my mother's visit. He sent a LinkedIn message, which was the medium of someone who wanted to make contact, but was uncertain about the temperature of more direct channels. The message said he was proud of what I had built, and that he hoped we could reconnect, and that he was in Columbus if I ever wanted to catch up. I replied briefly. I said thank you for reaching out and that I hoped he was well. I did not confirm a meeting. Marcus texted 3 months after the IPO. He said he had been thinking about me and that he was sorry for being absent during the hard years, and that he would understand if I did not want to reconnect, but he wanted me to know that he thought about the friendship and that it had mattered to him. The text was longer than any message he had sent me in 5 years. It had the quality of something that had been drafted and revised before being sent, which I recognized as a form of effort that was meaningful even if the timing was what it was. I replied the next day. I said I appreciated him saying it and that the friendship had mattered to me too, and that we should get lunch when I was in Columbus. We had lunch 2 months after that. It was a 2-hour lunch, and it was not easy in the way that lunches were not easy when the 2 people at the table were bridging a gap across which significant things had happened. Marcus talked about why he had stepped back. He had the specific honesty of someone who had thought about something for a long time and had arrived at an uncomfortable truth, which was that he had been afraid of my failure in the way that people were sometimes afraid of being close to something that reminded them of risks they were taking in their own lives, and that proximity to my collapse had made him want distance from anything that felt similar. He said it plainly and without excessive self-flagellation. I said, "That's actually a useful thing to understand about yourself." He said, "It took me 5 years to understand it." I said, "Better late than clear." He laughed. The laugh was the same laugh I had known for 20 years. That helped. The extended family's reconstitution has happened gradually and in the specific non-dramatic way that real things happened, which was one conversation at a time without a single moment that could be pointed to as the resolution. I am at the Sunday dinners now when I am in Columbus, which is once a month approximately. The dinners are different from the dinners before the failure in the way that things were different after you had been through a real thing together. More honest, less performed, with the specific quality of people who had tested something and knew what it was made of. My mother calls on Sunday evenings now. The calls last between 30 minutes and an hour, and they are about actual things. She asks about the work, and I tell her about the work. She tells me about the dental practice and the neighborhood and the small ongoing drama of a life lived in Columbus that she narrates with the specific dry humor she had always had. Last month, she asked me what I was reading, and I told her, and she ordered the same book, and we talked about it the following Sunday for 40 minutes, which was the best version of a Sunday call either of us had had in years. The bills conversation happened in the 4th month after the Saturday visit. She had brought it up herself, not as a list, not as a presentation, but as a real conversation between 2 people who had rebuilt enough of a real relationship that the conversation could happen honestly. She explained what had happened with her hours and her finances and what the actual situation was. I listened. I asked questions. We talked about what the realistic picture looked like and what the realistic response was. I helped her, not because she showed up with a list, because she was my mother, and because when the relationship was real, the response was different from when the relationship was a transaction. The amount was real, and it addressed what it needed to address, and we put it in the structure of an agreement rather than a gift, because my mother was the kind of person who needed it to be an agreement in order to receive it without it changing the relationship. She paid back every dollar. Monthly, over 2 years, smaller amounts than I had expected but consistent and complete. She paid the last payment on a Tuesday and called me that evening to tell me, and we talked for 45 minutes about everything except the payment because the payment was done and the relationship was the thing. Patricia Wade was promoted to Chief Revenue Officer at Clarity Analytics 2 years after the IPO. She said in her acceptance that the company's success was built on the specific culture of honest assessment and direct communication that had been present from the beginning and that she expected to maintain. I said that was exactly right and that I expected her to hold me to it too. Owen Hayes joined the board of directors as lead independent director. He said he had watched me build 2 companies and that watching was no longer sufficient. I said that seemed like the right conclusion for him to reach at 67. He said he had reached it earlier, but was being diplomatic about the timing. Dublin, Ohio in March had the quality of a place that was deciding to become spring before spring had fully committed. The grass was beginning its return. The sky was making up its mind between gray and something better. The mornings required a coat that was slightly too much for the afternoon that followed. I was at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning with the coffee and the report and the specific ordinary quality of a working morning that happened to be different from what working mornings had looked like 5 years ago in the Clintonville room in ways that were real, and that I was deliberate about not treating as expected. My mother had called Sunday evening, and we had talked for 50 minutes. She had read a business magazine article about company culture and wanted to know if I thought the article had missed anything. I had told her the 3 things the article had missed, and she had said that made sense, and that the third one was the most interesting. The conversation had been exactly what it was, 2 people who knew each other well talking about something they were both thinking about. That was the version of the relationship worth having. Not the list of bills, not the managed distance of 5 difficult years, not the group text reconstitution after the IPO coverage. The version built from the specific work of 2 people who had been through a hard thing and decided that the hard thing was information about what the relationship was made of rather than a verdict on whether the relationship was worth having. Owen had said once, early in the Clarity years, that the thing most founders got wrong about failure was that they treated it as the opposite of success rather than as a predecessor to it. He said failure was the set of conditions that produced the knowledge that made success possible, and that the difference between founders who recovered and founders who did not was not resilience in the abstract sense, but the specific willingness to learn what the failure was actually teaching without managing the lesson toward a more comfortable conclusion. I think about that often. The first company failed because the timing was wrong and because my analysis of the infrastructure dependency was incomplete. The second company succeeded because the timing was right and because the analysis was built from 2 years of operating inside the problem with the wrong timing. The failure was the education. The family was the same story told in a different register. The years of distance had been painful, and the pain was real. They had also produced the specific clarity about who was present and who was absent, and why that I could not have had without the years of distance. The presence after the IPO meant something different because the absence had preceded it and had made the question of presence real in a way it had not been before. I built Clarity Analytics alone in a Clintonville room because the circumstances of the first failure had removed every other option. What I built in that room was also the only version of the company I would have built, and it was better than the version that better circumstances would have produced. The same is probably true of the 5 years. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, drop a comment, and share it with someone who is in the middle of something that has not resolved yet. Subscribe to this channel and ring the notification bell. Every story here is this honest. Take care of yourselves. See you next time.